Hello and welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of Intelligent Transport and Vortex, I would like to thank you all for attending. My name is Leah Hockley. I'm the editor of Intelligent Transport, and I'll be moderating the audience Q&A at the end of this webinar. Joining me today is John Vinson, Commercial Director at Vortex IoT, and Paul Castello, Account Manager at Master Holdings, who are here to discuss how air quality monitoring can complement traffic management and enforcement technology. Following today's presentation and discussion, we will move on to a live question and answer session where you can pose your questions to the speakers. Please do remember that you can submit your questions at any point during the webinar using the questions panel that is situated in the menu on the right. Now, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Paul, who will begin our webinar today. Over to you, Paul.
Well, he won't, but it'll be John. But never mind. Thank you, Leah. But thank you and welcome, everyone. Paul will be doing his bit later on, so thanks to Paul. Right, okay, I'll just turn off my camera while I go through this. So welcome, everyone. Today, how can air quality monitoring complement traffic management and enforcement technology? Paul and I will give you a good webinar on this today. So firstly, a little bit about us very quickly, because I know this is not the interesting part for you guys, but effectively Vortex is a technology division, and we were acquired by Marston Holdings, who Paul works for, just nearly a year ago now, actually a year ago in about 3 weeks' time. We were a small startup business based in South Wales, and we specialise in environmental and smart city environmental monitoring devices. We effectively have a very, very high skilled team, and we do everything from R&D through to manufacture, assembly, the whole end-to-end manufacturing process and design process in South Wales. And we have some key, we've been bought by Marston's basically to add to their technology portfolio. So our leading product is the air quality monitor, quite unique in the market, and that combines very well with some of the other technology, which Paul will talk about later on in the presentation. So we all know about air quality. I won't read all those out, but what was really interesting at the World Health Organization when they launched the new guidance levels for guidance recommended levels for air quality last year was that they were at pains to say there is actually no safe limit for air pollution, and that there's medical evidence to demonstrate that air pollution at any level can damage ecosystems and the human body. They're also at pains to say that actually if you tackle air pollution, you tackle climate change. If you tackle climate change, you tackle air pollution. So currently, air quality improvements have more or less plateaued. We had a very big improvement in air quality when we started to ban things like coal burning and smokeless zones, etc. But actually, it has recently more or less plateaued. A little bit about the current methods of measuring air quality. So there's two main methods currently which legislation supports. One is the passive diffusion tubes, which you all know about. These are small sort of test tube sized devices which can be easily deployed, and they can be deployed in large numbers. So they're very good at giving a spatial analysis of nitrogen dioxide, but that's all they measure. And they also measure the total amount of nitrogen dioxide for the time that they are deployed. So very good spatial, but very poor temporal resolution. So effectively, it's a bit like, I use the analogy, it's a bit like measuring rainfall in a bucket. You don't know if all that rainfall was on one day in the month, or whether it was a continuous amount of rainfall throughout that month. And that's what diffusion tubes do for nitrogen dioxide. At the other end of the scale, we have the reference stations. So that's either the AURN stations run by DEFRA, or a lot of local councils will have, not all of them in all cases though, will have one or more of their own reference stations. These are much more sophisticated equipment, much more expensive, but usually continuous monitoring, so much better temporal analysis, but very poor spatial analysis because they're very expensive, so you can't actually have them on every street corner. What our product tries to do, or the VTX Air solution tries to do, is try and fill that gap between it. So it's not trying to replace reference stations or diffusion tubes. They're both backed by legislation at the moment. What we're trying to do is create another data set to enable you to have a greater insight into what is occurring in terms of pollution in your area. So they are at a price point which allows that large deployment, and they also measure a number of parameters in near real time. So for example, the standard unit would measure NO2, ozone, PM 2.5 and 10, relative humidity and temperature. So it gives you a greater amount of data on which to understand how pollution is occurring in your area. So, hyperlocal air quality monitoring. This didn't really exist until Vortex came on the scene, and we had the first hyperlocal deployment about 2 years ago. And by that I mean in every few hundred meters. We have the largest one in Europe in Hammersmith and Fulham. That'll be a network of over 500 sensors in their single borough. I've mentioned what parameters it always measures. The difference about this one is that it's driven by AI and machine learning and IoT technology, so it doesn't have a SIM card in it. Instead, it connects through a mesh network. That means we can deploy it through tunnels, around corners of buildings, etc. It gives us some distinct advantages. The mesh network allows it to be self-healing, to route data how it wants to get the best, make sure that data gets out to the cloud in the best possible way. It's also hyper secure, and I can say that because we're working with GCHQ on this technology as well. The other important thing is it allows us to be in constant communication with it. It's a bit like the analogy I'd use for your office Wi-Fi network. So you can move around your house, move around your office, and you're constantly connected. It enables us to do some nice things, which is to basically be in total communication with it all of the time. So we can monitor the health of the device. We can also monitor the status of any of the parameters it's measuring and upload that data continuously. And it also enables us to do things like commission it remotely, or to determine when the sensors are starting to drift off and apply corrections, or to upload new firmware and software. So that's what we call over the air. So it's designed to be a maintenance-free, fit and forget unit, which you can then basically deploy and then forget about, and we can do all the monitoring and corrections and updates of software remotely. Designed for very harsh environments. So a unique thing about ours is that it has solenoid controlled inlets and outlets. So we have it deployed, we've had it deployed for over 2 years, or nearly 3 years now, at some really, really heavy industrial sites where all the other equipment has failed. Effectively, it's designed is to survive those harsh environments. We've had it deployed in Qatar and in desert areas where it's been the only one to survive there as well. So it's very, very robust. I've already mentioned that it has a lower total cost of ownership because effectively, unlike, say, for example, you compare that to diffusion tube where you have to actually drive to change those tubes, creating pollution, ironically, but there's a carbon intensity. We keep changing those and moving and delivering to the lab, etc. As I said, we've designed it completely here in the UK. It's fully recyclable and it's manufactured and assembled here as well. So we have a much better control over our supply chain and are able to be agile and create new devices and new designs of devices as and when needed be. Effectively, we try and price in a very simple, transparent manner. So it's effectively a price per unit per year, and that gives you everything. That gives you the data, that gives you the unit, that gives you a portal. It might give you an API if you want one into your business systems. So that's the sensor in itself. Actually, the sensor itself is not the important part. It's the data it generates. And that data we combine with other data sets such as weather and as such some of the technology which Paul's going to talk about in a moment, and that's where the real power of the combined technology offering in terms of traffic interventions can really become really powerful. So I'll stop there for a moment. I think we have a poll coming up now. If I've got that right, Leah?
Yeah, absolutely, John. Thank you for that. So we do now have a poll which we would like to ask everyone that is currently watching, which is, do you think that monitoring air quality is important? So there are 3 options, whether that's somewhat important, very important, or not important. And we'd really love for you to be able to share your thoughts. So we'll give you about 30 more seconds or so to do that. Absolutely, and please do make sure if you haven't voted already, just to add your thoughts in there. Just give you a few more seconds. Brilliant, there we go. So the results of that one was that 8% found it somewhat important, 93%, so an overwhelming majority there, consider it to be very important, and 0% consider it to be not important. So Paul, I will now hand over to you to follow up on that.
Thanks, Leah. Sorry, I was muted there. I couldn't unmute myself. Yeah, my name's Paul Costello. I'm a Strategic Account Director with Marston's Holdings. So I work and operate across various parts of the business. But as John suggested there, I kind of spend the bulk of my time working with John in the technology business. And today I kind of just want to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the CCTV technology that's available to us and how utilising that technology with air quality monitoring can provide some really detailed granular data. So I guess firstly, why use it? The London Council's Code of Practice is really clear. It's about understanding traffic levels. It's about reducing contraventions. But we actually think it's about improving traffic flow. We think it's about minimising contraventions, gathering data, and ultimately making the road safer. And capturing that data in a reliable way and capturing really granular data can actually support informed decision making, help overcome objections to new schemes that local authorities might be considering, and can really demonstrate the power and the effectiveness of those schemes. So actually, as John said in the last slide there, it's all about the data. I think that's going to be the overriding message of this presentation. So moving on to the next slide, I thought it'd be interesting to, which I don't seem to be able to do now. There you go. I thought it'd be interesting to show just a couple of video clips from the CCTV technology and how they work. So in that clip that you just saw, effectively what's happening is that the ANPR cameras are monitoring a trigger point, and they capture VRMs as vehicles go through that trigger point. In this case, the VRM would have been captured, a soft DVLA lookup would have been conducted, and the results returned to the equipment at the edge. That equipment would then understand that that vehicle was over 7.5 tonnes. That contravention there is restricted access to anything over 7.5 tonnes. The system then, all at the edge, using video analytics, generates a video evidence pack, which is sent through to the back office for review. That's fully automated. Until the point it gets reviewed, there's no human intervention. So it's a really powerful system that can just run quietly in the background. So looking at school safety as another example, school safety is a really important piece of the work that we do. As you can see here, the system basically is designed to monitor vehicles that are stationary on the zigzags. And again, completely unattended, fully automated. It zooms in on the VRM, it zooms out, it zooms in on the signage to demonstrate that the contravention has occurred, and it generates a video evidence pack. And I think what we need to understand is when you start to gather that contravention data, but most importantly, overlay that with air quality data, particularly at school streets, you start to really provide some powerful evidence about the effectiveness of the school street schemes, and you can make a huge difference to the health and well-being of children, the most vulnerable road users. So in terms of air quality monitoring at schools, I mean, we know that children are most affected by poor air quality. You know, the toxin to weight ratio is significantly higher. Their lung capacity, as you can see there, is significantly less, and ultimately they're closer to the tailpipes of all the vehicles that are spewing out, you know, toxins. So we understand that they are the most affected bunch. And I think what's really important to understand is that the peaks and troughs of school pickup and drop-off times can make a huge difference to that air quality at that period, which isn't always reflected in air quality monitoring using diffusion tubes. To really understand those impacts, you need to understand it at that hyperlocal level, because the peaks and troughs can be really significant. So I wanted to just talk through a scheme that we delivered in Hammersmith and Fulham. John mentioned it earlier with the network of air quality monitors we got there. We worked with Hammersmith and Fulham to develop they call it a traffic congestion and pollution reduction scheme. It's effectively a restricted access area, and it's designed to reduce rat running. It's designed to improve air quality, and it's designed to improve the residential back streets for residents of Hammersmith and Fulham, who were being plagued by out-of-borough visitors that were using their side streets to avoid main routes and reduce their journey times. So we worked across the group on this particular model. So we worked with Project Centre, which is another part of the Marston's group, to understand the road usage, conduct some analysis, look at who's using what at what times, where the pinch points were on the roads, and we developed a model and pulled together a lot of different data, including traffic surveys, GPS vehicle traffic information, real-time feeds from our Videalert cameras, and real-time feeds from the air quality, so we could understand exactly what was happening on the streets and see where those pinch points were. By rolling that scheme out really effectively and utilising the technology, and I think that's one of the really important bits to understand, utilising the technology means that there's no physical barriers, and there's no blockages to residents using those streets. What started off as being quite objectionable to most of the residents has actually become quite respected, and most of the residents, as you can see, are actually in favour of the scheme now. Now that took a year, but that was effectively developed by utilising the technology rather than putting physical barriers in place, because it ensured that residents had free access. It ensured that they weren't hampered. They could still get deliveries. Emergency services weren't affected. So the scheme worked really well by utilising the technology. And I think we've got another poll now, haven't we?
Lovely, thank you, Paul. So yeah, absolutely. We wanted to ask the audience once again another poll. So are you aware of the new moving traffic enforcement legislation, Part 6? So really simple response to this one, just a yes or no answer. So we'll give you some time to respond to that. But yeah, please do share your thoughts with us because we'd love to know. Brilliant. Please do keep those responses coming in. We've had a fair amount already voted, but for those who haven't, please do offer your answers. That's brilliant, and we'll just give you a few more seconds. Lovely, there we go. And then so the responses to that are not quite so drastic as the difference between the others, but 24% of those watching responded saying that yes, they have heard of the new legislation, and 76% have said that they haven't. So John, Paul, your thoughts on that?
I think for me that's a little bit of a surprise. I think, you know, I was expecting probably more people to have heard of it, but it's, you know, it's an important piece of legislation from our perspective, because at the moment moving traffic contraventions such as band turns and yellow box junctions can only be enforced using CCTV technology within London, but the new Part 6 powers enable local authorities outside of London to enforce those restrictions using CCTV technology. So it's actually a bit of a game changer for a lot of authorities, because they can now actually start looking at some of their really challenging junctions and put in some schemes to enforce those and improve compliance at those locations. So it's an important piece of technology. John, any thoughts for you on that before we move on?
Oh, I think you've said it right, Paul. I think it's a new tool available to those outside London, which I think a lot have been crying out for. Yeah, I was a little bit surprised at the figures, but it gives us something to work with, doesn't it? So
absolutely. So again, just moving on from my perspective of the presentation. I mean, and I'm going to hammer the point home again, it is all about the data. The data is so important in our opinion. And I think for me, I've seen a change in the way that we work with our client base. I think probably 2 years ago, I was more focused around looking at the deployment of hardware and how I supported the deployment of that hardware for our client base. Now the hardware is just a tool to capture the data. So there's been a change in that mindset, and I think it's really clear that having the granular data around your road network and around the use of streets and how people are using those streets really makes a huge difference in terms of that informed decision making. This screen that you're seeing here is a screenshot from our Power BI dashboard. So basically what we do, we integrate various different data sets from across the group. So this data set here that you're looking at is all vehicle reporting. So we are capturing data on every vehicle that passes through a camera, and we're not capturing data from a GDPR perspective, but we are capturing the makeup of the fleet. So you can see that we capture and understand vehicle banding, CO2 banding. We can understand vehicles by fuel type. So you can start to look at how your fleet is made up. Is it predominantly diesel that's coming into your borough? Is it predominantly petrol? Is it petrol? Is it electric? Is there been an increase in electric usage? Do you roll out more EV charging points? So again, that data enables you to make some important decisions about where you roll out new infrastructure and how you roll out new infrastructure. So it's absolutely critical from our perspective. Again, I'm trying to move on, but I can't. Could you move me on, Leah? So this slide shows around kind of discards. So the discards is more around once an alert has been captured, once a contravention has been seen, it has to go through to a human to review. So the review suite will be looked at, and a discard reason will be given if the operator decides that a contravention hasn't occurred. So this kind of gives you a useful tool to understand how effective a system is and what the reason for the discards are. So as you can see, from the Reading example there's 91% of the discards are because of emergency service vehicles. So it just gives you some really useful data to understand how the system's operating, what how well it's performing. Would you mind moving me on again? Thank you. And the final screen is around kind of really what the crunch of today's conversation is all about. It's looking at the transport data overlaid with air quality and understanding the impact of vehicle movements on air quality. And I think ultimately the point I want to make is that level of data, that level of information is really, really vital, and it really enables you to see what's happening, to make small changes across the borough, to make small changes in terms of how you deploy and see the results and demonstrate the results. And actually what we've found is by being able to do that, where schemes are sometimes objected to by residents or there is resistance, by doing this, you're able to demonstrate that actually it has made a difference. It has improved quality. It has improved, health impacts for your residents, and it often overcomes those objections. So that's it from me. I think we're probably over to questions and answers now.
Lovely, thank you for that, Paul, and thank you to both John and Paul for that insightful and in-depth presentation. I think it's really fantastic to learn more about road safety and transit times and air quality and how these can all be improved through implementing a pollution reduction and traffic management enforcement scheme. So thank you both so much for that. Following that excellent presentation, we will now move on to our question and answer session. So just a quick reminder for our audience, please don't forget that you can still submit your questions to our speakers by using the question panel in the menu on the right, and we will try our best to get through them all. So, John and Paul, we will now take a look at our first question. So, I'd like to ask you both. You've offered some really interesting case studies there to kind of show those watching how the work that you do is positively sort of delivering these results for various different clients. But what other clients do you work with, and do you have any other success stories with these clients that you can share with us today?
Shall I take this one, John? Because
well, you can start, and I'll add to it, Paul. Yeah.
So in terms of client base, we work across the whole of the UK. We're working with some 80% of London boroughs. We work with councils the length and breadth of the UK. We work in Wales. We work in Scotland. So we've got a really broad base of clients. In terms of some other success stories, I think there's quite a few, but another recent one that I've done a presentation on a few weeks ago was a deployment in Lewisham, and again it was a school streets deployment, utilising the air quality monitors, utilising the CCTV technology to reduce traffic outside schools at pick up and drop off time. We've completed the case study on that, and I'm just looking at some notes in terms of the actual results that we achieved. We've looked at the success results, and effectively we've reduced car journeys in Lewisham outside schools by about 1.5 million car journeys a year. The impact of that has also been massive, because actually we've estimated that we've reduced carbon by about 3.5 tons. We reckon we've taken out almost 7 tons of nitrogen and about half a ton of PM2.5. So there's been some really significant results, and actually the impacts of deploying this technology can be massive.
I think what I'd add to that is that's a really good example. The difference of combining the technology with other data sets, the difference is that actually it changes the messaging. That's one of the key things as well we find with councils. So if you're trying to do enforcement with CCTV, the number one reason you're doing it is road safety. The second one is probably trying to increase public sector journey times, so people become more, have more faith and reliance in public transport. So you're keeping the bus lanes clear, you're keeping the yellow boxes clear. Actually, the effect of outside schools, etc. The third one is air quality, because the effect outside schools, using traditional legislative methods of measuring air quality, you don't pick up what the children are experiencing at pick-up time and drop-off time. That's just lost. The NO2 tubes don't do it. You haven't got a reference station outside each school. So the only way to actually have any indication of what is occurring in terms of what exposure limits are to children is to actually have some monitoring in and around the school. So having one sensor outside of school doesn't really tell you very much. What you want to know is what is the impact of that. And when we do our deployments, such as in Lewisham, Hammersmith, Fulham and others, it demonstrates what is the impact of that intervention. So is it the fact that actually air quality is improved at the school, but have you pushed that problem round the corner where everyone else is parking up now, and creating more pollution there for another vulnerable group, like for example old people's homes or something like that? And we can find that. And in other cases, we actually find it does create that nudge behaviour, which we're all after. It does actually improve a larger bubble of cleaner air around the school, because some parents do say, right, okay, I will walk or cycle or whatever with my child. So unless you have a network of sensors around that school, you don't really get to judge the full impact of that intervention. And that's what demonstrated. So traditionally, we've always done it by modelling. We all know about Dieselgate now, so we now know that actually some of those models are being called into question. So actually having an indicative network around your school or around your area changes the messaging and enables you to really determine that ROI. And so, for example, at a yellow box junction, for example, it's no longer just to be seen or perceived, it can be by the public as a revenue generating exercise. You actually you can demonstrate the improvements in air quality by improving traffic flow. So that changes the messaging, and that's a very powerful statement for the councils.
I'm just going to add to that. I think that's a really good point, John. And I think one of the things that we've seen in Hammersmith and Fulham is exactly that. And actually, some of the results have been quite surprising. So we saw in Hammersmith and Fulham that the rat running residential streets was reduced by about 70%. So it had a massive impact on those residential streets. And I think the expectation had been that it might displace the traffic out onto the main routes. But actually what we saw was that a lot of the traffic just dissipated because people did start to use alternative forms of transport. So we saw that people were starting to use public transport a little bit more effectively, and the traffic actually evaporated. I'm not saying it evaporated completely, but I don't think we saw the impact that we expected. So it definitely helps with a mode shift, and it can really make a difference in terms of encouraging active travel and public transport.
No, that's really interesting, Paul. Thank you for that. I think it's good, isn't it? Because the industry at the moment is so focused on this modal shift, but how we achieve that is kind of very ambiguous at the moment. So it's really great to hear from you this sort of really specific use case, showing that not only is it helping with air quality, it's really positively contributing to the efforts to encourage modal shift. So thank you for that. That was really interesting. And I think coming back to one of the points that you both made earlier on in the presentation about data, data, it's so important at the moment. People are referring to it rather contradictory as the new type of oil. So I kind of wanted to ask you both a couple of questions on this topic, because we've had some from the audience that I think are really interesting. So the first thing that I wanted to ask you both is, how can clients access this data that is being produced from these solutions?
Go on, John.
Well, there's a variety of ways. So if it's just a pure air quality deployment, and we do that for other reasons other than just traffic enforcement, people trying to understand what the pollution is, then that's available either through a customer portal or through an API, or directly into their system. So some of our private clients, for example, in the industry, have their own environmental suite analysis. So it's either through a portal, API, or through ingested into your own business systems. When we supply it to Marston's then have the power to actually combine all their other data sets, and Paul can describe what they do there.
Yeah, so I mean, from our perspective, what we tend to do is bring those data sets into our Power BI platform, and we make sure our clients have access to that Power BI platform, where we utilise the data from our traffic technology. We utilise the data from the air quality monitors from VTX, but we can also bring in other data sets, and actually it becomes kind of like quite a powerful data warehouse. And obviously with Power BI, it enables you to really start developing some detailed analytics. You can interrogate, you can look back, you can create historical trends, you can review changes. So there's a lot that you can do with it, but for us, it is all about the data, and we make sure that data is shared with our client base.
Absolutely, thank you. And then kind of following on from that, how do you make sure that the data that is being collected and shared is accessible and easy to understand for your clients? So like, for example, John, you mentioned there about a portal, and Paul, you were saying about how this information is being shared in a variety of ways. So maybe you could both expand on how you make sure that this data is easy to understand so that your clients can use it in the best way possible.
That is a really good question, and I think that's the hardest part of our role, is actually how you communicate all of this to both interested people within the business, within the council, within a private industry, or to the wider public, because everyone has a different understanding. So we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that our portals and things like that are easy to understand. We work very much with the clients. We have our own, within the Marston's Holdings Group, we also have our own software company, so we're able to design our own GUI and data and software and apps and things like that anyway. So we can always, we always work with the client to decide how they want it presented. So, for example, in our air quality portal, then that might be linked to the DEFRA index, so that you can see all of your heads on a map, and you can see at an instant glance what colour they are and see what the status of air quality is at that moment. So it's trying to make things much more visual. It is the hardest part, communicating it, and then actually how you take that data to it, because a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing. And actually, if you give a lot of data, then it becomes unmanageable as well. So it's how you present that, but it's giving the right tools to the clients to make sure that they understand it, and we will work with them to actually display it in the way that suits them, and that does vary from client to client, quite remarkably actually sometimes.
Yeah, and again, just to add to that, I think you're 100% right there, John. And I think one of the things that John and I do with our clients is kind of scope the understanding and scope the requirements, and that's a really important part of the process, because whilst John's at 100% right that every client's going to have a slightly different requirement, actually different teams within the same client will have different requirements. So part of our role is to work with the clients, work with each of those individual teams, understand what it is that they want to see, and develop the portal and develop the solution around those requirements. So that's quite important to do that piece of work at the front end.
And what I'd say is we also work with other community interest groups, things like that, because the general public don't understand parts per million or micrograms per cubic meter or anything like that. Actually, they want to know, I want to walk my son to school this way, this day. Is this the best route for air quality on that day, or should I go a slightly different route? They need it in terms that they can easily understand. They're not scientists, and it's very easy for us, and even people who are dealing with it, the council who might be dealing with this, but also dealing with bins or something else, they still have more knowledge than the general public. So it's all about making sure that your target audience, those you want to influence into those modal shifts and behaviours changes, they have the data presented in a way which that actually makes sense to them. So that's the hardest part, really.
Brilliant, thank you both for that. And then kind of following on from along this data theme, so one of our audience members has asked about how accurate the data is that you collect, as well as whether or not the traffic data is available from public CCTV to be used. So I don't know if you could share some thoughts on this as well.
So sharing data from public CCTV feeds, we can integrate data from other feeds, but obviously the system that we are using is a fully hosted system that's designed around kind of our captures and utilising our video analytics. So yes and no is the slightly sort of hedgy answer to that. We can understand and we can integrate other data sets into our Power BI platform. One of the things that we work with is police ANPR systems, and we provide data from our system to the police. So it can work the other way, but what we tend to find is actually most of the CCTV, public safety CCTV cameras are set up for a slightly different reason and don't capture traffic data in the same way to give the same sort of confidence levels.
I think I add to that, but I'm right in saying that actually, as part of the enforcement requirements, each evidence pack which Paul talked about there has to have a manual human look at it and check it off before it goes through it. So there's that check there to say that actually it has read a number plate properly and correctly. So it's that final bit. In terms of air quality, then the sensors themselves, we design and manufacture them ourselves. The actual sensor chip is the same that most airs. There's only about 1 or 2 companies who provide them. We will basically then put them through our own environmental chambers, build them, they then get co-located with a DEFRA station or a reference station prior to dispatch. And then we normally like to have one when they're deployed in the field. We'd have one at the local council's reference station, so they can at least see that it's following the right trends and manage it like that. And we have the OTA over the air capability to correct any drift, etc., on the fly as well. And I should add, we also use other third parties like Bureau Veritas or Ricardo to independently verify that data for us, and that's what a number of our clients will do.
Brilliant, thank you. And then maybe you could both share your thoughts on how accurate this data is in terms of what's being collected and how easily it could be used.
Well, in terms of actually for air quality, we're not trying to replace, a reference station accuracy or whatever. What we're trying to do is demonstrate that we're following the same flows. They're called indicative air quality samples. And it's to demonstrate that they're following the trends of those reference stations to give you another data set, which enables you to take an interaction. As I mentioned on one of those slides, a reference station isn't available at every corner of every street. Diffusion tubes only measure NO2 over a certain period of time, normally about 3 or 4 weeks, and don't pick up those troughs. What we're trying to do is give you yet another data set. It's not the Bible of the data set. It's, you combine that with your traffic information, your the road structure, the weather data, etc., to enable you to make a more informed decision.
Yeah, and I think from a traffic perspective, you know, the accuracy requirements are slightly different because we are relying on ANPR camera reads to capture the traffic data. We tend to sit at around 96-97% accuracy, but there's a lot of things that can affect that, and there's a lot of you know, the deployment at each location can affect the accuracy levels. But ultimately, every camera that's deployed is monitored closely, and if there's changes in accuracy levels, we're able to deal with it. But as John said earlier, every single clip is reviewed by a human and approved. So, you know, from our perspective, I think the traffic data is accurate. We're confident it's accurate. What's important is the accuracy of that air quality data, and I think John's covered that off perfectly.
Lovely, thank you very much. And Paul, I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned sort of 10 minutes ago or so, which was that you were saying that you work with councils, you know, across the UK. And one of our audience members has asked about sort of schemes outside of London and whether or not there's any government funding currently available to those schemes in order to support deployment of air quality sensors for local authorities. So I don't know if either of you can sort of share your thoughts and experiences about these schemes outside of the capital.
John, you might be better off at this one in terms of funding streams available.
Well, in terms of funding, I mean, we have the advantage that we work together with the wider Marston's group, and especially if it's in an enforcement scheme, and that gives us a way of generating, I won't say revenue, but generating funds which can be used to fund some of these things from the contraventions. In terms of pure air quality, then DEFRA, for example, do an annual grant scheme which comes out normally about August, September time, which councils can apply for. Sometimes there's regional levelling up funding available, etc. Other than that, it is quite difficult to find the funding purely for air quality, which is why deploying with enforcement solutions and demonstrating the improvements you get in air quality as well as traffic improvement is a really powerful tool. Obviously, there are other frameworks, things like TTAS and things like that, which we are available through, etc.
And really, from our perspective, in terms of kind of deploying enforcement cameras, we recognise that it's not always easy, and a lot of councils don't always have capital funding available. So we make sure that there's different funding types available. So we can do CapEx models, we can look at OpEx models. So there's various different routes that you can choose to go down. But effectively, I think the important thing is we understand and we recognise that any scheme that's deployed needs to wash its own face financially. And I think typically you find that they do. They absolutely pay for themselves and can then be used to fund air quality and wider air quality kind of rollouts and deployments.
Lovely, thank you very much. And we've had another really interesting question submitted by an audience member, and I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this one. So they've said that air quality depends on building topology and wind patterns. So our audience member would like to know, do you model the dispersion of pollutants when you compare it with traffic volumes? And did you integrate the data from other sensors beyond your own, maybe the reference grade ones and other low-cost sensors deployed in the neighbourhood?
So we do sometimes even deploy, we have our own weather stations which we deploy as part of the network as well. What we tend to do in terms of the modelling and things like that, then we tend to work with people like Ricardo and Bureau Veritas, who have been doing this for a number of years. So they sort of will help us combine all those data sets to give us an independent view. So what we don't like to do is sort of mark our own homework. So we would work, and we do have a number of clients, we work together with people like Bureau Veritas or Ricardo to produce those insight reports, which can use all sorts of data sources. Some of the platforms will share their data, not all will, and we've offered our data to other platforms as well, and some of them won't take it as well. So we welcome the sort of work DEFRA are doing to actually give some sort of guidance on the use of these monitors going forward. and when they're right, and what's the right application to use them for, because some are better than others in certain applications, and there's a number of us out on the market there. Some are all very, very good. So in answer to the question, really, in terms of modelling, then we would work with professional modellers who've done it for 10, 20, 30 years and respected in the industry. And between Bureau Veritas and Ricardo, they look after, I think, practically 99% of all the reference stations in the country. So we rely on their expertise. They are far more expert in that respect, and it gives that independence, as I mentioned.
Brilliant, thank you, John. So kind of focusing now on the sensors themselves, one of our audience members would like to know what level of certification the VTX sensors have.
At the moment, they're not certified, but we are currently going through MCerts, and we've had our first stage review and passed all of that. So if clients do want the MCerts version, that will be available shortly. It all depends on what you want to do it for, different courses and price points, etc. So it's understanding, that's why it's important to understand what you're trying to demonstrate from your project, what you're trying to achieve, and whether you have to what accuracy you want it, because even MCerts isn't as accurate as a reference station. So it has its own place as well.
Lovely, thank you very much. So sort of following on this strain about the sensors themselves, are there any other business cases where these air quality sensors can be installed?
Yes, so we've got a number of different types. So we're doing a lot of industrial sites. So if I give the example of Neathport Talbot, that's what I call the Los Angeles of the UK, and the reason for that is effectively, it's, if you know Neath, it's got a very large steelworks on site. It's got a port. It's got steel-related industries around the side. It has the coastline itself, which can generate pollution and dust and particulate matter. It has the largest social housing estate in the UK, which burns all sorts of things. It has a very large travellers site. It has the M4 elevated above the town, and it has the main east-west railway line. And so we're working there with some different companies and with the council there to deploy. I think we have, between the two of them, probably about 150 sensors. And what's that showing is really interesting, because everyone used to blame just the steelworks for the pollution. And what is apparent, that actually a lot more factors, like some of the people on this call have mentioned, in terms of weather and traffic, etc. We can find that on some days, actually, the pollution is coming from Bristol, Avonmouth Docks, and drifting across the Bristol Estuary and coming from that direction. You can see the impact of the M4. You can see the impact of one of the most interesting things was one ship was coming into port and failing in its legal duties to switch to a cleaner fuel, so many nautical miles off the coast, and created more pollution in one visit than the M4 did in a week. So there's lots of different cases where you can use it in terms of construction, or understanding the different sources of pollution and their directionality and what their sources are, to enable you to have those data sets to make a more informed decision.
Lovely, thank you very much. And as we come into sort of the last 10 minutes of the webinar, I'd just like to start wrapping up quite nicely with and get both of your thoughts on some really interesting questions. So improving air quality is a huge focus for councils, cities, governments, and plenty of others at the moment. But I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on what you think is stopping people from implementing these types of air quality and traffic management solutions, as well as how VTX can help with this. So I don't know if either of you would like to share your thoughts on that.
I think it's an interesting time. So I would say COVID has really brought forward people's understanding of air pollution. They've seen a difference of cleaner air and cleaner water and quieter streets and traffic and all the rest of it. So I think people are much more aware. That obviously presents its own challenges, as does the cost of living. So financing these things these schemes is more of a challenge. And I think that's where we're lucky as a very large group operating across, 70% of the councils. We have the ability to, as Paul described, to finance these things in different ways. So I think that's one of the barriers. I think another barrier is probably cultural, and everyone likes to think their car is their castle. So that's, challenging people onto that, and getting, people don't like to be told what to do. So we need to develop the methodology, which is about nudge behaviour, which is about improving and people understand their own individual impacts as well. That's a never-ending question, quite frankly, isn't it?
I mean, I 100% agree there, John, and I think the cultural thing is the biggest challenge that I certainly see. And I think if you look at a lot of the schemes that have been attempted, few have succeeded, many have failed, and I think that's because there's a number of challenges with the way that they've been deployed. For me, the early engagement and getting people to understand the benefit of the scheme is absolutely vital. And I think if that's not done well and not done early enough and not done transparently and openly enough, I think people have a tendency to believe that this is just a money-making scheme. But you know, we all know and we all understand, and you know, this has been the whole point of the discussions. It's not about income, it's not about revenue. It is absolutely about improving street safety, you know, protecting the vulnerable and doing all the good things that we all want to try and do and we all want to try and achieve. But as John says, I think the culture is, you know, if it's going to add 5 minutes to my journey, it's not acceptable, and that's it. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I do genuinely believe that if consultation and stakeholder engagement is done early enough and done well enough, you can change people's mindsets. And I think that the slide earlier from Hammersmith and Fulham demonstrated that. You know, at the start of that journey, 80+% of people were against the scheme. At the end of the journey, 90+% of people were in favour of the scheme. So I think it's about developing models that achieve what you want, and it might not achieve 100% of what you want in the first instance, but you know, it's small steps towards achieving those goals. And you can nudge behaviour, you can change people's mindsets if you do it in a way that doesn't hugely inconvenience them, and you know, starts them on a journey towards changing the way that they live and changing towards the way.
I think that was brought into stark contrast with Oxfordshire we're working with now, because Oxfordshire previously went for their own scheme where they had planters at the end of their road trying to close off and create a low traffic neighbourhood. Actually huge resistance in the press, etc., and they're now taking it out and going to enforce it with camera technology, because people want to be able to enter their road whichever way they like. They don't want to have to be told they have to drive around the block and they can only come in from the east side or whatever, you know, and you know, emergency vehicles can't get through. So that engagement piece is absolutely crucial. I think Paul's spot on there.
Oh, that's brilliant, thank you. And Paul, like you say, it's a big job, but it's really great to hear that Vortex is clearly up to the task of tackling it. So that's wonderful, thank you. So we've spoken a lot about all of these solutions, but kind of, I think it would be really good for you both to offer some insight into our audience into how they can go about procuring them. So I don't know if you'd like to offer some insight there.
Well, I wasn't expecting to do a sales bit here as such, but there are different routes to procurement. There's obviously, you know, there's government funding if you can't get that in terms of level upping fund and things like that. There's a T-test framework. Paul and his team are more than happy to talk about different ways of funding it in terms of capital schemes, OPEX schemes, SaaS models, whether we, you know, share revenues up until a point that the capital's paid off, that sort of thing. So there can be a no outlay type routes available as well under the right circumstances. What I would say is Paul and his team are extremely flexible in how we work with our clients in order to actually, you know, achieve the outcomes they want to come with. So and then, as I mentioned earlier, there's also things which come out occasionally, like the DEFRA grant scheme that comes out usually annually. That's normally a multi-million-pound deal. I think it's about 7 or 8 million this year, which councils, for example, can bid into either on their own or jointly. And we've supported a number of councils with those bids and have worked with other agencies as well to support them and their clients on those type of bids as well. So.
Yeah, again, I think you're 100% right, John. I think, you know, for me, we've tried to develop very flexible models. We're fortunate that Marston's as a business is very embedded in this industry. It's, you know, it works closely across the whole transport industry, and we've got parts of our organisation that work across the length and breadth of councils and local authorities. So we've got various different kind of procurement routes and various different ways of procuring the kit. One of the ones that John mentioned there was TTAS, and that's a new framework from Crown Commercial Services, we think that it's a really interesting framework, partly because, again, every part of our group is on that framework, and it gives you the ability to very quickly procure new kit if you need to. You can do it through mini comp, you can do it through direct award, you can procure the CCTV technology, you can procure consultation services through Project Centre through it, and air quality monitors through Vortex. So we believe that that's a really good procurement route. But yeah, ultimately, as John says, we're quite flexible in our approach, because, again, we understand that often capital funding isn't available, so we want to make sure that we are able to deploy these systems in a way that's most effective for local authorities, to enable them to get up and start collecting that data and capturing that data.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So we are reaching the end of the webinar now. So as sort of a final closing thought, I'd really like to ask both of you, what would be your advice for those watching who do not currently have these types of air quality and traffic management solutions implemented, but there's definitely the opportunity there for them to do it?
So I think for me, absolutely. I mean, if there's locations that you believe you're interested in or are potentially suitable for this kind of technology, I think the starting point for me in every instance, almost unequivocally, is to start with the air quality monitors before you worry about the CCTV technology, because actually what's really important with that data piece, again, is to understand the baseline. So if you capture the air quality baseline, you create a baseline, you can then use that information to start deployment, start considering how you deploy the tech, and look at how that tech impacts on the air quality. So the before and after picture is really important. So I think if there are locations where people think that this might work, I would absolutely suggest reaching out, getting in touch. We can start the process of working with you to scope kind of suitable positions, create surveys, walk you through the process, give you the advice and guidance, and make sure that we start collecting that baseline data, which is absolutely vital.
Yeah, it's something we didn't really cover very much in the webinar, really, but that's Paul's absolutely spot on. The more data you have for a longer period beforehand, the better you can judge your ROI and discount other influencing factors of weather and season and all these sort of things which can affect air quality. The longer you do it, the better you get a picture to demonstrate the true impact of it, of any intervention that you do make, and make you understand, where to make those interventions. For example, you could pedestrianise London on some days and you still have an air quality issue coming in from Europe, for example. So you need to understand all the background levels and everything as much as you can, and all those point sources as well, and behaviours which give you a greater picture. So the longer you do some baseline monitoring, the better, really.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you both very much. Well, sadly, that is all that we have time for today. I would first like to extend my thanks to both John and Paul for such a fantastic presentation and a really engaging discussion at the end there. I would also like to take a moment to thank our audience for taking the time to join us today, as well as submitting all of their interesting questions. A quick note for our audience: as you leave the webinar today, a very short survey will appear on your screen asking you to rate your experience. Please do take a moment to provide your feedback, and if now is not a good time, the survey will also be sent to you shortly afterwards via email. If you could please complete it, we would greatly appreciate it. However, for now, on behalf of both Intelligent Transport and Vortex, I would like to once again extend my thanks to our speakers for their time today, and thank you all for attending today's webinar, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.